Today we would like to introduce a topic about which we're going to film a number of episodes, that being what is commonly referred to as the Valley of the Kings, on the west bank of ancient Thebes, modern Luxor.
And the ancient Egyptians called it Set Ma'at, the place of truth. Now, truth is a convenient translation for Ma'at, but it's not the whole concept. Ma'at is really morality, justice, cosmic order. And because the king was charged with maintaining Ma'at, that's one of the main purposes of pharaonic kingship in ancient Egypt, it's appropriate that the king's final resting place would be called the place of Ma'at, of truth.
So Ma'at is essentially the opposite of what the Egyptians called Isifet. So Ma'at is order, Isifet is disorder, but together they mean you have an ordered world. So everything for the Egyptians consists of balanced pairs. The Valley of the Kings, as we call it, becomes the burial place for really all but one of the major kings of the New Kingdom, beginning with the reign of King Hatshepsut. So Hatshepsut, when she is queen, has a queenly tomb that was actually cleared and recorded by Howard Carter.
Wow. Well before Tutankhamun.
Well before Tutankhamun, in one of the southern wadis of the great Theban Massif, of the great Theban hills, in which the necropolis of ancient Thebes are located.
And to define wadi is an Arabic term that refers to a dry canyon. And it's commonly used in Egyptology, so it's a good word to know.
A dry watercourse, anything from an arroyo to a massive canyon of some sort. So, the Valley of the Kings is really a large wadi with a number of forks to it, located just behind the area in the western hills known as Deir el-Bahari.
To examine a bit more the Valley of the Kings, we're going to pull out a map and show you how that wadi interrelates to some of the other geographical features on the west bank of Thebes. When we think about the monuments of modern-day Luxor or ancient Thebes, we think about the big temples on the east bank, Karnak and Luxor, and then the mortuary temples on the west bank, Deir el-Bahari, Medina Habu, the Ramesses, and the Valley of the Kings is behind the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari. And often that interrelationship is not exactly obvious.
So, let's take a look at the map here.
So here's the temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahari. And as the crow flies, the tomb of Hatshepsut is very close. But if you go between the 2 points today, you have to go out of Deir el-Bahari, around Dra Abul Naga, and back in to the road that takes us into the Valley of the Kings. Most of the tombs are in this main part of the wadi. And this juxtaposition is very interesting. The Tomb of Tutankhamen, Kv 62, and the numbers increase as more tombs are found. The tomb of Ramses VI, which began as the tomb of Ramses V, is Kv 9, King's Valley 9. And the reason why, fundamentally, Tutankhamun's tomb was found virtually intact is because when Ramses VI excavated his own tomb, the material that was excavated went on top of the tomb of Tutankhamun, obscuring it both from ancient tomb robbers, those that were sent out by the pharaonic administration at the end of the New Kingdom, as well as anyone in more recent times.
There's been some speculation that Thutmose I might have begun the tomb that Hatshepsut completes. But what we do know for certain is that Hatshepsut incorporated the burial of her father, Thutmose I, in her tomb in the Valley of the Kings. He is later removed by Thutmose III, for whom Hatshepsut originally is a regent, and reburied in another tomb. So there is a tomb in the Valley of the Kings that was only for Thutmose III. But on the basis of the history of his burial and reburial, and based on the architecture of the tomb, it's fairly clear that the tomb that is often labeled as Tomb of Thutmose I in the Valley of the Kings was actually excavated for Thutmose I by Thutmose III.
Complicated history.
Yes, we can go into this. We can go into this later in much greater detail.
But this juxtaposition of a tomb in the Valley of the Kings and the mortuary temple at Diyarbakir brings up a really important point about ancient Egyptian tombs in general, and that's that all tombs have a private and a public component. So the public component, the tomb chapel, is where you'd bring offerings or speak invocation offerings, such as 1,000 of bread, 1,000 of beer, 1,000 of fowl, and 1,000 of beef. Because those are really the 4 things you don't want to do without in ancient Egypt.
Yeah, so from very early on, even apparently from the first dynasty, for the first dynasty rulers, we seem to have this group of burial place and burial monument along with some sort of a ritual center that's located a little bit closer to the cultivation, closer to the Nile Valley, where people come for celebrations.
That's really cool to see it going back that far.
This is what's really interesting, because one of the books we'll be talking about later, in later episodes, we don't have time for that now, is a book of...
Why don't we have time for it now?
Well, I think it's going to take a lot more than 10 minutes to cover the Book of Amduat. We'll just introduce it. So we call it the Book of Amduat, or Imi Duat, that which is in the netherworld. Sometimes it's written as though it means he who is in the netherworld. The ancient Egyptian original name for it seems to be the Book of the Hidden Chamber. And in the 4th and the 5th hours of that composition, it's one of the 2 compositions, along with the Book of Gates, that emphasize the 12 hours of the night as major divisions. In the Book of Amduat, in the 4th and the 5th hours of the night, we see a series of descending corridors and passageways that lead down to an oval, very similar to what we find in the New Kingdom royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And this, in the 4th and 5th hours of Amduat, is called Ra-Sa-Chow.
The place of hauling.
And the place of hauling, interestingly, first comes up as the name for the Giza necropolis. So what we see in Egypt is a really interesting interdependence of actual architecture on perhaps religious concepts and even religious texts and illustrations, and then those very texts and illustrations may themselves come back and influence architecture in some way. So we have descending passages and corridors and chambers and pyramid architecture earlier. And certainly in the New Kingdom royal tombs, we walk through an architectural realization, dug into the mountainside, a realization of this Ra-Sa-Chow, this descending series of corridors and passageways.
What we call the underworld, or the netherworld in ancient Egyptian, is the Duat. So it's spelled with a star hieroglyph followed by a T, and often a determinative that is the same designation as a building, what we would call the pair sign or the house determinative.
And sometimes the star is in a circle.
Yes, which is really significant because the circular form of the burial chamber, the oval form of the burial chamber, is also the oval form of the sarcophagus. And interestingly, that oval form seems to be related to a snake's egg, as well as a womb. So you go back to this moment in the netherworld where the sun god descends. This is all describing his journey through the 12 hours of the night. And he descends into the very lowest hours, into the 4th and 5th and 6th hour of the night. And he joins together with the waters of noon, these chaotic waters that enable the sun god to be reborn. And within these chaotic waters is this serpent's egg.
The serpent's egg is referred to as the chamber of Sokar, right? The egg or the oval of Sokar in the chamber of Sokar that's down in the bowels of the netherworld, where the ordered world, the created world, comes back into contact with these chaotic waters, this abysmal substance called noon that represents the oneness out of which creation is a separation into an infinite number of balanced pairs. When you walk into a royal tomb of the New Kingdom, you are walking into a model of the first half of the night journey of the sun. And what happens after the middle of the night happens in this realm beyond what we can experience. It happens in some parallel extension of the royal tomb out beyond this existence. And what happens in the egg of Sokar is that the king descends into the sarcophagus, which is a model of the egg of Sokar, where these chaotic waters that are destructive for order and life, but that represent the potentiality for rebirth for the dead. The sun god goes back into those waters, termed in the Netherworld books youth, flesh, the corpse of the sun, and is reborn. So the king would go down into an oval sarcophagus, similar to this late 18th century Chinese export for the American market tureen here, and the king would be reborn out of the sarcophagus.
So we should show Tutankhamun.
Tut lives in the sliding pine terrain. We've never got to use him didactically before.
Perfect moment.